Shalom, I'm Tony Robinson of Restoration of Torah Ministries, and I want to talk to you today about Parashat Vayishlach. Parashat Vayishlach from Genesis 32, verse 3 through 36, verse 43. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this story thematically. We're going to cover Genesis chapter 32 through 33. Which is the story of how Jacob encountered Esau. It's Jacob's rendezvous with Esau, I like to call it. And I want to answer the question today, why didn't Esau kill Jacob? Why didn't Esau kill Jacob? You will remember that Jacob had to flee from Esau back in Parashat or Vayetze, or Toldot, depending on which when you see that as beginning. But Jacob had to flee Esau because remember Jacob had stolen the blessing from Esau, and so the question is why didn't Esau kill Jacob? Now the text here in Parashat Vayishlach, the text, everything in the text leads us to believe that Esau was coming to kill Jacob. So let's just look at a couple of things. The messenger's bad report about the land. Now, remember when Jacob was about to approach the land, that he sent messengers ahead of him, and they went ahead of him, and they saw that Esau was coming, and it said that Esau was coming with 400 men. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but in the Torah lessons, I've taught you how Jacob's life is actually a prophetic picture of what will happen to the descendants, to the nation of Israel later on. If you watch Jacob's life, every major event that occurs in his life is a thematic pattern for the major events which will occur in the lives of his descendants, i.e. the children of Israel. So for instance, Jacob is about to approach the land after his what I call exile in Padam Aram, and he's about to approach the land, and notice that he sends messengers. This is thematically connected to when the children of Israel were about to approach the land after their long exile in Egypt. And remember, Moses sent 12 spies to check out the land, you see. And so this is what's going on here. The Torah is prophetic. Jacob's life is a prophetic picture of what will happen to the children of Israel. And so Jacob sends messengers, and they come back, and this is why I say a bad report about the land. I'm using a play on when the 10 of the 12 spies came and gave a bad report to Moses. But they said, hey, he's coming and he's got 400 men with you. Now, automatically, that sounds a little negative. It doesn't sound exactly like Esau's coming to welcome Jacob with open arms. But here's where we need to look at the significance of numbers, and we need to specifically look at the significance of the number 40, number 4. Now in Scripture, remember that the number 4, it would appear as 4, but even if it's 40, 400, or 4,000. The significance, one of the major significances of the number 4 is that the number 4 is the number of trial, temptation, testing, and judgment. Remember that the children of Israel were 40 years in the wilderness being tested. Remember that Yeshua was 40 days and nights being tempted by the devil. And there are other examples of 40. And so now we have an example of 400 men who are coming. And this portends danger just by the fact that there are 400 men, because we already know that the number 4 teaches danger in that way. And then lastly, the reason why we know the reason why we suspect that that Esau is going to kill Jacob is just by looking at Jacob's reaction. If you look at Jacob's reaction in Genesis 32 verse 8, it says Jacob became very frightened and it distressed him. It talked about how he did three things. He divided his family into 2 different camps, and then he began to send gifts over, gifts of droves of animals to appease Esau. And then the third thing he did was he prayed to Adonai, and Adonai would spare his life. So regardless of what we may think, Jacob is afraid for his life. He thinks that Esau is coming to kill him, and I think and I think that that's justified. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to try to answer this question: why did Esau kill Jacob? And what we need to realize is that Jacob's rendezvous with Esau is told as a parallelism. I hope I said that right. Why Esau? We want to find out why didn't Esau kill Jacob? Jacob's rendezvous with Esau is told in a parallelism. We've talked about these before, and I want to share this one with you. It extends from Genesis 32, verse 6 through Genesis 33, verse 17. And remember, one of the goals of Restoration of Torah Ministries is to teach you how to understand the literary techniques of the Torah, because Adonai is trying to communicate to us many, many things in these stories in the Torah. And quite often, some of the things that seem enigmatic or unexplainable or seem strange, they can be understood once we understand that Adonai uses a different type of literary technique than we're used to in our Western Roman Greek world. And so what we want to do is we want to talk about a parallelism. And remember, in a parallelism, a story is divided into two halves. And in the first half of the story, you will see a progression of certain themes, let's say theme A, B, C, D, E. And then in the second half of the story, you will see the progression of those themes, those same themes, A, B, C, D, E, in the same order. And that is the case at hand here with Genesis 32, verse 6 through 33, verse 17. And so as you can see here, what we're going to see is that Genesis 32, verse 6 is going to be thematically connected to Genesis 33, verse 1a. And then Genesis 32, 7 through 12 is going to be thematically connected to Genesis 33, 1b, and so on and so forth. As you see, as we start here at the top, Genesis 32, 6, as we work our way down through the story, we're simply going chronologically through the story here, but what we're going to see is that even though we're going chronologically through the story, that we're going to see this beautiful pattern A, B, C, D, E repeat, A, B, C, D, E with similar themes. And so what we want to do is we want to look at this and we want to see how these different units are thematically connected. So what we're going to do is go through them one by one and see what the common themes are. So let's look at Genesis 32 verse 6 and Genesis 33 1a. Now the major theme is going to be in yellow and bold and italic print. In Genesis 32 6 it says that the messengers returned to Jacob saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Okay, that's thematically connected to the beginning of the second half of this story, Genesis 33, verse 1a, where it says, now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. And so again, I'm just trying to help you understand why sometimes when you're reading through the scriptures, you will see certain phrases or words used twice. And this is one of the biggest hints. It's like a neon light telling you that the story is either told in a chiastic pattern or in a parallelism. And so we see here that two times we read that Esau is coming and he has 400 men with him. So that's the connection between A. So next in our parallelism, we want to compare Genesis 32 verses 7 through 12 with Genesis 33 1b. We're going to see how those are connected. Now right here in Genesis 32 7 through 12, this is a long passage, and as you see, it's thematically connected to just like part of a verse. So we'll see how that works out. It says, so Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two companies. Now, that occurs early on in the verse, and then later on, about 2/3 of the way, it mentions again that he divided them up, and he divided them in two. So that's why it goes all the way from 7 to 12, because dispersed throughout there are a couple of places which talk about how he divided his family into two camps. Well, that's thematically connected in the second half to Genesis 33, verse 1b, where it says, "So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants." The common theme being here that in both passages it talks about how Jacob divided his family. Okay, so all we're doing is just going through the parallelism, and we're seeing how the themes in the first half are equivalent to the themes in the second half. And I just want to remind you that when you find a parallelism or a chiastic structure, just remember that that Adonai is the one who put these patterns here. Okay, he put them there. He wants us to find them. He intends for us to find them. And so when we find these, we are looking into his wisdom. We're looking at something that he ordained for us to see, and this is his wisdom. Now, how we interpret it is another story, but this is Adonai's doing here, because he is the one that had the prophets write these prophecies in these thematic patterns. Okay, so let's check out our next section of scripture. Now, what I'm going to do is Genesis 32, verses 13 through 21. I'm just going to paraphrase what's happening here. This is the part of the story that recalls how Jacob sent a number of servants with droves of animals before him. And remember, they went one drove after another. So in other words, remember, he would send one servant over with, let's say, a few hundred donkeys. And he'd say, tell Esau this is a gift from your servant Jacob. And he'd send them off. And then he said, tell him that Jacob is behind me. And then he'd wait a little bit, and then he'd send another one off, and then he'd do the same thing, and he'd send another. So that's what that passage is all about. Well, it's thematically connected to Genesis 33, verses 2 through 3, which reads, "And he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. And then he crossed over and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother." Okay, what's the connection? The connection is this. Just as in verses 13 through 21 of Genesis 32, where he sent droves of animals over one group at a time, we see that he does the same thing with his actual family. He divides them into quote unquote droves. In other words, he divides them into groups of people, and he sends them towards Esau one at a time. Okay, so just like earlier where he sent, let's say, a drove of camels, and then a drove of donkeys, and then a drove of something else, when it comes to his family, he sends the maid servants over first, and then after they go, he waits a little bit, and then he sends Leah and her children, and then he waits a little bit, and then he sends Rachel, and then finally he himself comes later on, just as he was the last one to come after he had sent his droves of animals over. So you see, this is a beautiful connection, and a beautiful connection here that Adonai has been so gracious to share with us. All right, and then element D is Genesis 36, verses 24 through 30. It's thematically connected to Genesis 33, verses 4 through 12. And we're going to see this actually has a number of connections. And I want you to pay particularly close attention to this one. We're going to come back to this one later on. It says, "Then Jacob was left alone." And look at what it says here. It says, "And a man wrestled with him." A man wrestled with him. Well, in element D in the second half, in Genesis 33, verses 4 through 12, the thematic connection to "a man wrestled with him" is this. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him. Now, why do I say that those two are thematically connected? Because when you wrestle with someone, wrestling, there's a lot of contact. You're holding, you're grabbing each other. And so the man wrestling with Jacob is thematically connected to Esau embracing Jacob. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of other connections. In the first half of the story, Jacob said, remember when Jacob is wrestling, he says to it wasn't just a man. We realize that this was God. This was I believe a pre-incarnate Messiah. Sure, it says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." In other words, Jacob is saying, "Look, nope. No, Jacob is being forceful here. He's saying, no, I'm going to have it my way. I'm not letting you go until you bless me. Well, that's thematically connected to element D in the second half, where notice near the end it says, please take my blessing that is brought to you. Now remember that Esau has said, well, why are you sending all this stuff over to me? And then remember Jacob said, well, this is a gift. I want to appease you and I want to find favor in your eyes. And remember Esau said, brother, I've got lots of stuff. I don't need any of this. And Jacob said, no, I want you to take it. And then Esau was like, well, no, I don't need this. And Jacob was insistent. I mean, he said, no, I want you to take this. He says, please take my blessing. This is brought to you. And so finally, after Jacob continues to press Esau, finally Esau says, okay, well, I'll take them. Well, that's thematically connected to Jacob wrestling with God, saying, no, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. And then another connection here is right here where the man that Jacob wrestled with, he says, let me go. Okay, let me go. Well, that's thematically connected in the second half to when Esau said, let us take our journey and let us go. Okay, similar phrase. That's a third connection. And then the last connection, this is a huge one right here. Listen to this. In the first half, after he says, I will not let you go until you bless me, later on he says, for I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved. That is thematically connected in the second half to where Jacob says to Esau, inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God. Now it doesn't get any clearer than this. This is a huge connection, connecting Jacob's encounter with God or with this man, where he says, I've seen God face to face, referring to the man that he wrestled with. And then when he comes to meet Esau, he says, look, I've seen your face as though I had seen the face of God. Okay? All right, so let's keep going. Let's look at the last connection in this parallelism, Genesis 32, chapter 32, verses 31 through 32. They are thematically connected to Genesis chapter 33, verses 13 through 17. Now, this is really sweet here. There are two thematic connections in this verse. Beautiful. Now look at this. Just in the first half, just as he crossed over Penuel, the sun rose on him. And look at what it says. It says, and he limped on his hip. Now, where it says he limped on his hip, is basically describing his gait or his walk, gait, G-A-I-T, his manner of walk. Okay, well, that's thematically connected to Genesis 33 in the second half, where Jacob says, I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure. You will remember that Esau had wanted Jacob to follow him to Mount Seir, and Jacob didn't want to do that. And so Jacob is saying, hey, my flocks, they have born their young and they're nursing. And he said, look, if I try to go too fast, I'll wind up, many of them will perish. And so he says, let me just walk slowly at a pace. Well, that's the thematic connection. In other words, he's describing his gait again, that he needs to walk slowly. As a matter of fact, we know he needs to walk slowly because of what happened in his encounter with God when he wrestled with the man, the limp on his hip. Now, that's the first connection. Now, here's the second connection. In the first half, it says he limped on his hip, and look at what it says after that. It says, therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank. In other words, as a result of what happened, there is a tradition that occurs, therefore, to this day. Well, look in the second half. After he says, I will lead at a slow pace, look at this. It says, therefore, the name of that place is called Sukkot. Okay, just as it said therefore in the first half, it says therefore again, and we have another tradition. It says therefore the name of the place is called Sukkot. Now, we know therefore that Jacob is arriving in the land. He's arriving at the time of the celebration of Sukkot. Okay, and so this is another one of those beautiful ways that we know which time of the we actually know which time of the year it is that Jacob is arriving there, and that's another teaching in itself. But and it talks about how Jacob builds sukkahs. Sukkot or sukkahs for his animals and for his families. It was Sukkot. It was a celebration of Sukkot in the 7th month. But we're not going to look at that right now. All right, but what we want to do is we want to look at Genesis 36, verse 24 through 30, and we see that it's clearly thematically connected to Genesis 33, 4 through 12. I believe this was thematic connection D in our chiastic structure. And we just want to look at this now. It talks about how a man wrestled with Jacob. That's thematically connected to Esau ran and embraced Jacob. We talked about wrestling versus embracing. He says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. That's connected to when Jacob said, please take my blessing that is brought to you. Now, in the last connection here, there was actually 2 parts to the one connection. Look at this. In the first half, Jacob said, for I have seen God face to face. Well, right here it says, for I have seen God face to face. In the second half, that was thematically connected to when Jacob said to Esau, inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God. But now look, in the first half, Jacob also said, and my life is preserved. In other words, he says, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Well, that's thematically connected to when he said to Esau, and you were pleased with me, okay? Because in both instances, here's what's going on. When you look in the Old Testament, it is very plain and obvious to see that people thought that if they were to see God, that they would die. Okay, people thought that if they saw God, they would die. I mean, and this is what's going on here. And yet Jacob said, my life was preserved. And he does the same thing with Esau. He says, I've seen your face as though I've seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. In other words, remember, he thought that Jacob was coming to kill him. So just as he thought that if he were to see God face to face, his life would be in danger, he thought that if he was going to see Esau, that his life would be in danger. So just as Jacob, so here's the point. Clearly, this parallelism has equated Jacob wrestling with the man to Jacob encountering Esau. There's no doubt about it. Okay, we've seen those connections. Jacob's, when he wrestled with the man, he felt as if he had seen God face to face, and his life was spared. And when he saw Esau, he felt that his life was spared. Jacob made the connection between facing Esau and his life being preserved, even though Esau was coming at him with 400 men. He saw the connection between that event and the event of him wrestling with the man. In other words, just as Jacob's wrestling with God changed him, remember God changed his name from Jacob to Yisrael, so too did that wrestling match with God change Esau. In other words, we saw at the beginning of this teaching that there were numerous, the scripture was clearly painting the picture that Esau was coming to kill Jacob. But something happened. Something happened to Jacob and something happened to Esau. Jacob, as you remember, is a man always running from his troubles. Remember how he ran from Esau. Remember how he is now running. He wants to get. He was running from Esau early on when he went to Padan Aram. Now he's trying to avoid Esau again. Later on in his life, he's going to act very passive once Dinah is raped by Shechem. So in other words, and then Jacob was running from Laban. Remember when he left Uncle Laban, he snuck out stealthily and tried to slip away from Laban. So Jacob is used to deceiving people and trying to get away and not face face his problems, and so God changed him. And so just as he was changed, Esau was changed. In other words, what I'm suggesting to you is that the scripture is showing us that Jacob's encounter with Adonai was the key to having Esau changed so that he would not kill Jacob. Esau was on the way to kill Jacob. There's no doubt about it in my mind. The scripture paints that picture for us very clearly, and that is surely what Jacob understood by Esau coming with 400 men. But his encounter with Adonai was the key that changed Esau. Jacob realized that, noting that when he wrestled with the man, that it was like seeing the face of God, and then when he saw Esau, it was like seeing the face of God. And I want to bring out one other connection here, is to remember Laban's encounter the night before he met Jacob when he pursued Jacob. You remember the story. Jacob left. He left stealthily. Laban was upset. Laban hotly pursued Jacob. Laban was going to, we don't know what Laban was going to do to Jacob. But on the night before Laban caught up with Jacob, what happened? God appeared to Laban and said, you had better not speak either good or bad to Jacob, or else you're going to deal with me. That's basically what he said. You better not mess with him is basically what it says. You better not touch him is what Adonai meant when he said you better not speak good or bad. But notice what was happening though. This was the night before Laban was going to encounter Jacob. And Adonai stepped in and changed Laban. Well, the same thing is happening here, I believe, with Esau. Esau was coming with 400 men to get Jacob, just as Laban was coming with all of his relatives to get Jacob. The night before Laban encountered Jacob, Adonai appeared to him and said, you better watch what you say to him. And so likewise, the night before Esau was to catch up with Jacob, we see that Jacob wrestles with God. Adonai changes his name and changes his character, and I believe that at that encounter that Adonai changed Esau also, and I think that this is clearly taught in this parallelism. Now, I may not have all of the, I may not, I think that there's probably even more to this that I don't even see right now, but at this point, this is what I see. And as we continue to study this Torah portion for the years and years to come, I'm sure that Adonai will show us even more. But clearly we can see that Jacob has made the connection between his seeing God face to face and his life being spared. And he says, I see you as if I had seen God face to face and you were pleased with me. So I hope that this has helped you. And again, I just want to show you how these parallelisms, they help us understand the scriptures. So may Adonai bless you in the name of Yeshua until we talk again. Shalom, shalom.
I have the joy that is my salvation, hope for a soul.